everyone, I'm Captain Logan, and welcome to the adorable and bubbly Comic Vault. Today, we're going to take a look at the first story arc of Troy Little, and then Derek Charms later. The Powerpuff Girls from IDW. This came out, I think, 3 years ago now. This is from, end of 2013, and this was an ongoing that only ran for 10 issues and really could have stood to go quite a bit longer, and it was a fantastic attempt at doing ongoing, more long-form storytelling with the Powerpuff Girls as definitively a comic book, although this is so cinematically done and reads so much like episode storyboards, it's impossible for an episode not to play in your head and for you to not to, or at least me, to hear the voice actors in my head as I'm reading this. Incredibly expressive art, incredibly expressive lettering, and just an absolute delight and joy to read. This is the most authentic Powerpuff Girls thing, I think, that has been out since the original Powerpuff Girls series ended, and while I like things about the new series and was enjoying it a lot more early on than I have been the last few episodes, but we'll see what happens, this is genuine Powerpuff Girls stuff, and if you miss the Powerpuff Girls and you think that the new show isn't great and you want to have that experience again and you haven't looked at these, do be sure to do so. Now, I am probably going to talk about the big event that happened after this, Super Secret Crisis War, and also Powerpuff Girls Smash Up, and those are both really fun and, again, capture the spirit and the tone of the Powerpuff Girls, but I really wish this series had continued going on. What's impressive about it is that within an issue, at least some of them until the story, until the plotting gets a little bit more complicated, you'll get kind of what feels like one episode where it's, you open it up and it's the city of Townsville and then you finish it, once again the day is saved, or to be continued, the day isn't quite saved yet, let's see what happens next issue, and it brings this new element to Powerpuff Girls that we really hadn't had before. You had longer episodes. Not every episode was 10, 11 minutes. They had and I think season 4, I think it was an entire season of nothing but full 22-minute episodes. But we never had anything like this where we're continuing. I mean, there were callbacks to things and there was kind of a continuity, but we never had anything where you would have developments that were set up early on in something and then they would pay off later, and it's really cool to see that. If you like, this is kind of like it's kind of like a sequel to the Powerpuff Girls movie, although with the exception of the epilogue at the end of this arc, which is paid off in a hilarious way in issue 10. When you put them all together, it's kind of one big, not big enough in my mind, but it's kind of it's definitely one run. It's kind of one story. We are sort of building on some things in those last 4 issues, but we basically just tack on this ending with Mojo Jojo at the end of issue 10, because I think this series must have ended prematurely, and at the end of this, Mojo Jojo has this plan B. His plan fails, his really convoluted, hilariously and intentionally convoluted plan backfires on him, but he has this plan B that he's not going to tell the girls about. He tells them all about plan A, but he's like, I'm not dumb enough to tell you about plan B, and then we see what plan B is at the end of this, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but it hasn't paid off yet, and then because we knew the series was getting canceled, Troy Little, at the very end, I think, says, okay, we better go ahead and pay that off, otherwise Mojo Jojo is just riding around in orbit in space, waiting to, although that would have been pretty funny if the last panel of the series was just, and I'm still waiting to make my plan happen, but that's not what happens. Little writes and draws this, and I wish he had gotten to go for as long as Ninja Turtles and Star Trek have been going on. I would have loved 50, 60, 70 issues of this, constantly compounding on things that we've been establishing throughout the series, and I imagine it just didn't sell well enough, which is kind of a shame. this is in a lot of ways, I think, what folks that aren't liking the current cartoon series would love to see, which is an ongoing continuity, but still keeping the frantic pacing and the over-the-top cartoon violence and just the bold, bright franticness of the original show in this. So we essentially have two villain plots in this. We bookend with a Mojo plot, and then there's a him plot in the middle. And there's kind of a mystery for a minute as to whether or not him is behind the Mojo plot, but I think that Little is trying to kind of establish him and Mojo Jojo as the two definitive Powerpuff Girls villains that are like set in stone and will always, for different reasons with each of them, be exactly the way they are. That these are characters that refuse to change, they're incapable of changing, and every other villain in the Powerpuff Girls Rogues Gallery is a real person, at least as much as you're going to have inside of the cartoony, zany nature of Powerpuff Girls. That's what I love about this series. It's telling a real story, and while it's certainly not, it doesn't get to like such a deep dramatic place that it quits being a Powerpuff Girls, but it adds a sliver of a layer of real characterization, of real dimension to these characters that I loved seeing, and doesn't detract from, again, the cartoony nature of this. So opens with this Mojo plot, which doesn't look like a plot, but we find out later on, of course, that it's all part of this big scheme that Mojo has, where he's decided that he is sick and tired of being beaten by the Powerpuff Girls just over and over and over again, and so he's in his jail cell, and this is the end of the first issue. And I remember when this first came out, thinking that this was such a spectacular ending for the first issue of this, especially because I wasn't expecting an ongoing story. And so the professor shows up, and Mojo asks the professor to make him into regular Jojo again. He used to be his pet monkey, and the movie, and there's an episode that establishes the pet monkey thing as well. It gives us the kind of classic dynamic with the superhero and the supervillain where they create each other. And so if it weren't for Chemical X, and if it weren't for and it's really the professor's fault, if it weren't for the professor being absent-minded, you wouldn't have Mojo Jojo, because Chemical X wouldn't have hit him, he wouldn't have seen himself as a freak, and he wouldn't have responded to his insecurities by trying to control everything and rule everything. And here he wants to go back to that life, and he becomes the pet monkey again of the Powerpuff Girls and the professor. We finish up the him kind of subplot, and then we get back to Mojo, and he just happens to have set this up so that he would trigger himself to become Mojo Jojo again, just the precise moment that basically that the him plot is finished. At the end of this, we discover that he did all of this so that he could steal equipment that he needed from the professor in order to ignite the volcano that his lab sits on, and cause this eruption and cover Townsville in lava. That's his whole plan. Honestly, I like the middle section a little bit better than I like the Mojo plan. I think the setup is fantastic. The problem with it is Mojo always has whatever equipment he needs. That's one thing I didn't quite buy, even like in the context of this, is really Mojo's got to go to the professor for. I can see the Mojo needing to go to the professor for like Chemical X and stuff like that, but just like generically equipment to blow up a volcano. I don't know. He's got the Robo Jojo. He's got missiles. He's got all these things. It's really hard for me to buy that he couldn't have figured out a way to blow up his own volcano. And so this is one of those sticky things with something cartoony like this, because I'm not complaining that the plot, that the villain plot is too convoluted, because it's doing that intentionally. That's where it's going into parody realm, where it's making fun of these big, elaborate machinations that villains have, where they're trying to control everything, and they're trying to manipulate characters, and especially the heroes, to go exactly where they want them to, when there's always some much easier way they could have accomplished what they're accomplishing, and that's just the writer overly plotting in order to create drama and to make plot twists and to impress an audience, instead of writing from a more character-driven direction. So it's making fun of all that. That's not a problem. But at the same time, we're doing this balancing act where it is an ongoing story, and it is, in the middle portion, there's actually character arcs for these characters, and so it starts to look more like a real story and not just a silly cartoon thing. So that's a difficult thing to balance, and Little does a pretty good job with it, but there's a place or two where he starts to fall a little bit on the wrong side of that, I think. The middle portion, as I said, a lot more interesting to me, and the thing that makes me think that makes it read kind of like a sequel to the Powerpuff Girls movie, and a thing that just is enough story that you could have gotten a film out of it, and then, then it's a singular story, is this plot where him makes all of the villains in Townsville think that decide to be good guys and give up their evil ways. And the point that him is trying to make with that is that is cynicism, is that everybody deep down is just out for themselves. No one actually really cares about anybody else, and everybody is prone to one of or more of the 7 deadly sins, and a leopard can't change his spots. And so he's trying to prove this with all of the villains in Townsville. So the Powerpuff Girls give them a second chance, much to Buttercup's chagrin, and she keeps warning them over and over again. This is going to turn south. All of these, we've got a Sedusa, and we've got the Amoeba Boys, who are always hilarious and not remotely a threat at all. We have the Gangrene Gang. We have Fuzzy Lumpkins, and we have Princess. And really, the whole gambit of the major rogues are here, which is really fun and makes it feel like an event. And they're all, again, being good guys, but Buttercup thinks that this is not going to work out, and that they don't deserve a second chance. By the end, we're actually playing with the complex nature of human beings, where nobody is just good or bad unless you're him. And unless you're Mojo Jojo, who is not really straight up evil, because him is the devil. And him is kind of making it clearer, I think, here than he ever has been, that he is the master of the underworld. And but Mojo is a little bit more of a complicated thing, in that he has a tragic backstory like some of these other characters, but he was just a dumb simian before. He was, it's sort of like Ninja Turtle Mutates, where there was really nothing to him before, so he wouldn't want to go back to that. He's never going to change, because he almost can't help but be what he is. He's if you with Chemical Axe were transformed into a supervillain, and that gave you your sentience, and with it came an unsatiable desire to rule the world, this ambition to control everything, and it was between that and having no control at all and just being a pet monkey, and probably having a much less lifespan, but now I'm overthinking it. What would you choose? It'd be really hard to go the other way, and so I think Mojo is certainly more of a person than him is, but he's more complex than that. But the point Little is making with these villains, with these archetypes of villains, is that Mojo is the Joker. He's too far gone. He's never going to change, and he has at least this element of this kind of psychotic element. And like I said, him is the devil. He's Mephisto. So you have this really touching series of scenes at the end of issue 5 before we get to the bookend Mojo issue, where where all these bad guys are going back to their evil ways, but only because that's what they were and what they would have done before the mind control. They didn't even realize they were being mind controlled, and so you've got Princess helping Blossom save people on a bridge, and you have the Gangrene Gang picking up trash at the elementary school, and all of a sudden, him intentionally takes away their goodness that he gave them because he wants to see all that break down, and he wants to take away the Powerpuff Girls' hope in people, their trust and belief in people. And so at the end of this, the idea is that maybe they can change, but change takes time, and that's a real lesson to learn. That's truth, and was kind of impressed with Little for coming to that in a Powerpuff Girls story. The most heartfelt thing that happens that really got me a little bit is with Bubbles and Fuzzy Lumpkins, where Fuzzy really kind of likes Bubbles but doesn't want to admit it, and they had a picnic together and they were the best of friends, and all of a sudden, and luckily they don't all lose their memories, and so they all remember everything that happens to them, and it affects them, and they keep this moving forward. And so Fuzzy Lumpkins, and this is why I wish this series would have continued to go on, because these could have been really complex layered characters after a while, where Bubbles asks if they can still be friends, and if they can finish their picnic, and he says, well, maybe. And then at the end, he finds a piece of litter, and of course he gets upset whenever anything on his property is messed up, and he looks at it, and it's this cute picture that Bubbles drew of both of them as the best of friends, and he starts to tear up. And the point is that these are actually people that have decided to be bad guys, and that all comes from, different places in their background, and that him is wrong, and that people are not naturally inclined to be evil. People are inherently sympathetic, if not good, if not altruistic. At least they have a sense of empathy, and it's something extreme that happens to you that takes that away from you, or that makes you forget about it. And I really like that in a Powerpuff Girls thing. There's this great bit where, and like I said, the art in this is just absolutely fantastic. There's this great bit where him is raining down fire and brimstone, and he's got this whole list of, his list of the 7 deadly sins, and then he starts applying them to different characters, and he says that Princess personifies greed, and that one of the, I forget his name, I think it's Grubber from the Gangrene Gang, personifies gluttony. And then he goes to the Powerpuff Girls, and Buttercup is wrath, and Blossom is pride. And then he gets to Bubbles, and he says, now what is your sin? And she doesn't have one, but she makes it really clear that she's not perfect, because Bubbles has flaws, she has issues, but she doesn't have that one prevailing thing like the other two. Her main prevailing character trait is not a big character flaw. And I found myself wondering if Little was right about this, and thinking about what her flaws are, and none of them I could really come down on as what you would consider a sin, or one of the 7 deadly sins. She sometimes is lacking in courage. She has sometimes a lot of timidity. Sometimes she's too trusting. She can be gullible. But none of these are things that you'd call them flaws before you would call them sins. And I like that he's really careful not to say that Bubbles is perfect, that everybody should be exactly like Bubbles, because Buttercup had a point. Bubbles and Blossom were too trusting of the villains, and Buttercup was right that this was going to go south, but not for the reason that she thought. And so the answer lied, as so many things do, somewhere in the middle. And the idea was that the villains, yes, were going to go bad, but because they were manipulated to be good in the first place, not because they don't naturally have the potential to be better than they are. And Bubbles' whole point is that is that everyone has that potential. Like the best of the Powerpuff Girls episodes, there's a lot of really great satire, some of it kind of biting. There's this whole thing in issue 4 with the Amoeba Boys where they join the army when they think they're good guys. And they're just the idea of the Amoeba Boys being given guns is hilarious, because I imagine that even at point blank range they wouldn't actually be able to hit anything. And they are they're charged to guard a factory that makes canola oil. And there's this whole speech that their general has that's absolutely hysterical, where he's talking about how fast food is the backbone of America, and how if something happens to the canola oil, America is no longer America, and people won't be able to get their fried foods. And it's making fun of our inability to prioritize, and it's making fun of corporate greed, and there's a lot of that kind of stuff in this, and I think it goes a little bit farther than the TV show often would. There are also a couple places where it goes farther in the potty humor department, and I kind of wish we hadn't done that. Mojo Jojo writes a sign or writes a note to the Powerpuff Girls at the beginning of issue 6 in his own feces. That was going a lot farther than I think that show would have, and was honestly too gross to be funny, and I didn't really care for it. Especially because we go back to it and we act like it's kind of the funniest thing in the issue. Didn't care for that. But one thing that's nice about all of that is that it's clearly not aimed just at kids. And of course, the TV show wasn't either, but this really has a good sense of who its audience is. Little has no misgivings about the fact that it's mostly going to be adults that are reading this probably, and so it appeals to your nostalgia, and it's still cute and bubbly and fun, but it also goes to a little bit more of those adult sensibilities, and I like a lot of the pop culture references, and again, subtle, like the Powerpuff Girls usually does that stuff, and things that adults are going to appreciate before anybody else does. It also, again, keeps in mind that it's a comic book, and it goes to comic book places whenever it's doing kind of referential humor before it goes anywhere else. For instance, I think it's maybe the second issue, there's a... maybe it's the first issue. Yeah, it's the first issue, where the Powerpuff Girls are on a golf course, and Buttercup at first gets really annoyed that they're given golf clubs for protecting the city instead of statues, and that pays off a little bit later when the Gangrene gang becomes good guys, and they chisel a statue for them. I'm not sure if they actually build it or if they're just polishing it, but anyway, while they're on the golf course, they fight what is basically Man-Thing from Marvel, and they even bring up Swamp Thing, and in this kind of off the beaten path sort of way, where they're not calling him Swamp Thing, but Blossom says he's a Swamp Thing because that's what he is, and that's really funny. There's also a really cool sense of continuity from the original series in this, where when Fuzzy goes bad, he brings out his meat gun, and that's actually weirdly kind of sad, because Bubbles has become best friends with him, and he is one of the first things that she ever had to fight, and really freaked her out because he turned part of her hair famously into a drumstick, into a chicken drumstick. And it's also really funny because he uses that gun and turns part of him into a big piece of meat. So when him is at his scariest and most theatrical, he's got this big giant piece of meat coming out of his back, which is hysterical. And now Bubbles is having to fight Fuzzy Lumpkins, who was kind of becoming her best friend, and he has got the meat gun again, and she's kind of timid and afraid to fight him, and has to work through that. So the really good sense of continuity, and all of the kind of established elements that Powerpuff Girls tried to keep in mind in other episodes, like Blossom's ice breath, which is still weird because she lost it, but then she had it forevermore after that. And there's a couple other special powers here and there that come back. And if you really know your Powerpuff Girls, it's awesome. But if you don't, it's still very readable. And like I said, there's a lot more to it. than there is, both in story and both thematically and in characterization, than your average Powerpuff Girls thing. And like I said, it reminded me of the movie in that way, because I think there's a lot going on in that movie that that for whatever reason, people didn't latch on to, and it didn't catch on. But that's the reason that I love the movie. So this really appealed to me. And then, like I said, when you get to the end, Mojo Jojo has this hilarious plan B where he's shot himself up into space, and he's planning on remolding the world in his image. We don't really know what his machine is going to do, but it's supposed to redesign the Earth somehow. It's like his own personal Genesis machine. And you gotta wonder why he doesn't just do that in the first place, because he's like, this is a perfect plan because the Powerpuff Girls can't get me all the way up here in space. And then, of course, the end of issue 10, in a very hilariously convenient way, they do. But anyway, that's pretty much this arc, and I may come back and talk a little bit about the Charm stuff, and then the last 2 issues that Little did also. I've talked about those on other videos when they came out, so I'm kind of on the fence about whether or not I'm going to get to those, because this is kind of one big complete 6-issue story, and then the rest of it, there's just kind of some callbacks to it. So I may skip that. I'm not sure yet, but I want to try to get to Super Secret Crisis War and Super Smash Up at the very least before before Powerpuff Month is over. And then also I've still got all those DC comics to do, and I'll try to knock at least a few of those out this month. But anyway, thanks as always for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and happy reading.